What if the next global conflict begins not with missiles or military mobilization, but with the silent crippling of critical infrastructure thousands of miles from the battlefield? While headlines focus on naval buildups in the South China Sea, a more consequential battle is already underway in cyberspace. Today, Omni reveals how China's dual cyber operations, codenamed Salt Typhoon and Volt Typhoon, represent a fundamental shift in global power dynamics that most security analysts have missed. The implications will reshape how we think about modern warfare and national security. China's cyber capabilities have undergone a remarkable transformation over the past decade, evolving from relatively unsophisticated noisy operations to some of the most advanced and stealthy cyber campaigns ever documented. According to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence's 2024 assessment, China now represents the most active and persistent cyber threat to US government, private sector, and critical infrastructure networks. This evolution didn't happen by accident. Beginning around 2015, China undertook a significant restructuring of its cyber forces. The People's Liberation Army was forced to narrow its focus to military intelligence and reconnaissance, while the Ministry of State Security took over political intelligence gathering and commercial espionage. What makes China's approach distinct is its integration of state resources with a flourishing private sector cyber ecosystem. Unlike Russia or North Korea, which often deploy destructive attacks, China has historically focused on espionage and intellectual property theft, what experts call the greatest transfer of wealth in history. However, recent developments signal a dramatic shift in both capability and intent, as China now appears to be laying groundwork for potential disruption rather than just intelligence gathering. In late 2024, security researchers revealed that a Chinese hacking group, codenamed Salt Typhoon, had achieved what US Senator Mark Warner called the worst telecom hack in our nation's history. The operation gave Chinese intelligence unprecedented access to American telecommunications networks, compromising at least 9 major telecom providers, including Atan-DT, Verizon, and Lumen Technologies. Salt Typhoon represents classic espionage, but on a breathtaking scale. The campaign gave Chinese operators access to call records, text messages, and potentially even the content of communications for targeted individuals. As Kieran Martin, former head of Britain's Cyber Defense Agency, observed, this was essentially China doing a Snowden to America, gaining vast access to the nation's communications via a strategic spying operation of breathtaking audacity. What makes Salt Typhoon particularly concerning isn't just its scope, but its duration. It operated undetected for approximately 2 years before discovery, suggesting that communication records of countless government officials, business leaders, and intelligence personnel may have been compromised. Perhaps most alarming is what this reveals about China's technical sophistication. Salt Typhoon operators demonstrated remarkable stealth, leveraging advanced techniques to avoid detection while maintaining persistent access to critical infrastructure. Unlike previous operations focused primarily on stealing intellectual property, this campaign targeted strategic intelligence, suggesting a shift in priorities toward gaining geopolitical advantage rather than economic benefit. While Salt Typhoon represents an evolution in espionage, Volt Typhoon signals something far more concerning: preparation for potential conflict. First identified in May 2023 by Microsoft security researchers, Volt Typhoon has infiltrated an extraordinary range of critical infrastructure across the United States and its territories, including Guam, a strategically critical location for any US military response to a Taiwan crisis. Unlike Salt Typhoon, Volt Typhoon isn't primarily about stealing information. According to a joint advisory from the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, the US, UK, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, these intrusions appear designed to pre-position themselves for potential disruptive or destructive attacks in the event of a conflict. In simple terms, China appears to be installing digital time bombs that could be activated during a crisis to hamper America's ability to project military power or maintain domestic stability. Volt Typhoon's tactics are sophisticated and difficult to detect. The group employs what security experts call living off the land techniques, using legitimate system tools already present in the target environment rather than deploying custom malware. This approach makes their activities extraordinarily difficult to identify among normal system operations. The sectors targeted by Volt Typhoon are particularly noteworthy: communications, energy, transportation, water systems, manufacturing, and maritime infrastructure. This selection isn't random, it represents critical dependencies for both military operations and civilian life. Disruptions of these systems during a Taiwan crisis, for example, could significantly complicate US military logistics while simultaneously creating domestic pressure through civilian hardship. What's particularly alarming is that unlike previous Chinese operations that focused on specific strategic targets, Volt Typhoon reflects a systematic campaign to gain access to infrastructure across the continental United States and its territories, suggesting preparation for widespread disruption rather than isolated incidents. While American infrastructure has dominated headlines, Southeast Asia has quietly become one of the most heavily targeted regions for Chinese cyber operations. According to research by CI Firma, Chinese state-sponsored actors have been actively compromising networks across the region for over a decade, with Vietnam ranking as the most targeted country, followed by Indonesia. This targeting isn't random. Many of the governments facing the highest frequency of attacks are engaged in territorial disputes with China in the South China Sea. One group, tracked as Threat Activity Group 16, has compromised multiple high-profile military and government organizations throughout the region using custom malware families like Funny Dream and Chinoxy. Southeast Asian nations face particular challenges in defending against these threats. The region exhibits what security researchers call differing levels of technological maturity and resources that make implementing unified defensive measures difficult. While Singapore and Malaysia have developed relatively robust cyber defenses, countries like Myanmar lag significantly behind, creating vulnerabilities that can be exploited. China's Belt and Road Initiative, or BAR-AI, adds another layer of complexity, as infrastructure projects often create digital dependencies. Researchers have identified intrusion campaigns specifically targeting entities like Cambodia's Sihanoukville Autonomous Port and Laos's National Committee for Special Economic Zones, both critical BRI components. The hesitancy of Southeast Asian nations to publicly disclose information about their own cyber capabilities and limitations further complicates regional coordination. This reluctance, coupled with the lack of enforcement mechanisms in ASEAN's cyber frameworks, leaves the region particularly vulnerable to sophisticated state-sponsored attacks. What makes China's cyber capabilities particularly formidable isn't just government investment, but the integration of state resources with a burgeoning private sector and academic ecosystem. Unlike Western cyber operations that maintain clear separation between government and private entities, China has developed what analysts call a civil-military fusion model that creates a seamless flow of technology and expertise. This ecosystem includes hacking competitions like the MSS-linked Tianfu Cup in Chengdu, where young talent showcases their skills by finding vulnerabilities in common software. These competitions, often described as China's cybersecurity Olympics, can attract up to 30,000 participants and serve as recruiting grounds for intelligence agencies. The vulnerabilities discovered are, according to intelligence sources, siphoned straight into the state apparatus rather than being disclosed to software vendors. Private firms like iSoon represent another critical component of this ecosystem. Revealed through leaked documents in 2023, iSoon functioned effectively as a private signals intelligence agency with targets across 23 countries, from Nepal's presidential palace to Thailand's intelligence service. These firms provide both operational capability and plausible deniability for Chinese intelligence services. This integration extends to infrastructure as well. When Chinese hackers first emerged, they operated right out of Shanghai networks without disguise. Today, they utilize operational relay box networks maintained by private firms which leverage compromised devices worldwide, like home internet routers, to mask the origin of attacks. This evolution has dramatically increased both the sophistication and deniability of Chinese operations. To understand the strategic implications of China's cyber evolution, we must examine the Taiwan scenario, the most likely flashpoint for conflict in the coming decade. In this context, operations like Typhoon take on particularly ominous significance. In a Taiwan contingency, China would need to delay or degrade America's ability to project military power into the region. Each hour of delay increases the chances of establishing a fait accompli before effective intervention becomes possible. This is where pre-positioned cyber capabilities become strategically vital. Imagine this scenario. As tensions escalate over Taiwan, critical US infrastructure begins experiencing cascading failures. Port operations in key logistics hubs malfunction, delaying the movement of military equipment. Water treatment plants experience unexplained shutdowns. Power grids fluctuate, creating uncertainty and domestic pressure. Meanwhile, telecommunications disruptions hamper command and control capabilities. None of these incidents would necessarily be attributable to China in the crucial early hours, creating confusion about appropriate responses. By the time the situation clarifies, valuable intervention time would be lost. As Adam Myers, Senior Vice President at CrowdStrike, noted, if US forces can't get food and water and all the things they need to constantly restock, then it's going to be real difficult to deter China. This scenario isn't speculative fiction. It's the logical application of capabilities that security researchers have already documented. What's particularly concerning is that, unlike nuclear weapons, cyber capabilities lack established deterrence norms. There's no mutual assured destruction in cyberspace and no clear red lines that would trigger conventional military responses. The true danger lies in this ambiguity. In a crisis, Chinese leadership might calculate that limited cyber disruption falls below the threshold for kinetic retaliation, while still achieving significant strategic advantage. This miscalculation could lead to dangerous escalation if US leadership perceives such actions as acts of war rather than grey zone activities. While the evidence of China's cyber capabilities is compelling, it's essential to consider alternative interpretations. Chinese officials consistently deny engaging in offensive cyber operations, emphasizing instead what they describe as a defensive posture focused on protecting sovereignty in cyberspace. From China's perspective, its cyber activities represent a natural response to perceived United States dominance of the digital domain. Chinese scholars have long framed Western internet governance as a form of digital colonialism that threatens national security. As Rogier Creemers of the University of Leiden notes, China views cyber sovereignty as an extension of traditional state power. There's also debate about intentions versus capabilities. Security researchers like John Hultquist of Mandiant point out that what separates China from other cyber powers like Russia, North Korea, and Iran is that those states routinely cross the line from espionage to disruption, while China has never pulled the trigger on its destructive capabilities. This restraint suggests a strategic calculus rather than operational limitations. Some analysts argue that Western assessments overstate the threat. According to Carnegie Endowment Research, China faces significant disadvantages in critical technological self-sufficiency and remains vulnerable to attacks itself. China reportedly suffered the highest rate of distributed denial of service attacks globally in 2018, suggesting its defensive concerns may be genuine. Even the militarization of cyberspace itself is contested. Chinese representatives at international forums have criticized what they call this military paradigm that disregards the principle of non-use of force and may increase the risk of interstate misperception and conflict. The evolution of China's cyber capabilities fundamentally alters traditional security calculations. Unlike conventional military buildups that can be observed, quantified, and potentially countered, cyber capabilities remain largely invisible until deployed. This asymmetry creates new challenges for strategic stability. For decades, American military dominance has relied on technological superiority, secure communications, and reliable logistics. Chinese cyber operations specifically target these advantages. As former NSA Director Keith Alexander noted, cyber espionage represents the greatest transfer of wealth in history, allowing China to close technological gaps rapidly. Meanwhile, operations like Salt Typhoon compromise secure communications, and Volt Typhoon threatens logistics infrastructure. This new reality raises profound questions about deterrence. Traditional deterrence relies on clear attribution, visible capabilities, and credible threats of retaliation, all of which become muddled in cyberspace. When an attack can be routed through compromised civilian infrastructure in multiple countries, attribution becomes time-consuming and uncertain. More concerning still is the blurring of peace and conflict. The pre-positioning of cyber capabilities during peacetime creates a permanent state of vulnerability that exists regardless of diplomatic relations. The very knowledge that critical infrastructure contains potential digital time bombs could influence decision-making during crises, potentially leading to miscalculation. For policymakers globally, this reality demands new frameworks for establishing norms in cyberspace. The absence of established red lines creates dangerous ambiguity about what actions might trigger escalation to conventional conflict, a situation that increases risk for all parties. Understanding China's evolving cyber strategy provides several actionable insights for policymakers, security professionals, and informed citizens. First, traditional security frameworks focused on military capabilities must expand to include cyber dependencies. Critical infrastructure resilience becomes a national security imperative rather than merely a technical concern. Second, public-private partnerships are essential, as most vulnerable infrastructure is privately owned but nationally critical. Neither government nor industry can address these threats in isolation. Finally, international norms for responsible state behavior in cyberspace are urgently needed. The militarization of the digital domain without clear rules of engagement increases risk for all nations. The twin typhoons Salt and Volt represent not just technical achievements but strategic inflection points. How nations respond will shape the contours of international security for decades to come. For Omni analysts, one thing is certain: the most consequential battles of the 21st century may be fought not on land, sea, or air, but in the invisible realm of cyberspace. What aspect of critical infrastructure in your region do you believe would be most vulnerable to sophisticated cyber operations? And what steps would you prioritize to address this vulnerability? Share your insights in the comments. Subscribe to Omni for more in-depth analysis of emerging security threats that mainstream media overlooks. Next week, we'll explore how quantum computing may render current encryption methods obsolete, creating a crypto apocalypse that few governments are prepared to address. Don't miss it.